Let me ask you something. Have you ever been stuck in your own head, like trapped in a loop of what ifs, I should have, or why did I say that?
Yeah, me too.
And the truth is, most of us aren't trapped by the world around us. We're prisoners of our own minds. See, the biggest battles we fight, they don't happen out there. They happen in here, points to head. And if we don't learn how to manage those emotions, they'll manage us. They'll run our relationships, steal our sleep, and shut down our confidence. So today, we're talking about something real, something raw, how to stop being a prisoner of your mind and start becoming the master of your emotions. Let's talk about taking your power back. That's where we're going to feel you can't fix, you don't see. And that's where awareness comes in. A lot of people think emotional control starts with discipline or motivation or some quick fix technique they saw online. But that's not where it begins. It starts with simply noticing what you feel when you feel it and why it shows up. That's where I'm going to feel. That awareness, that quiet noticing is the very first step to freedom, because you can't change the direction of your emotions if you don't even realize you're in the storm. That's where I'm going to feel. Let me paint a picture. Imagine you're driving a car and there's a fog so thick you can barely see the road. You're swerving, overcorrecting, feel stressed out because you don't know where you're headed. That's what it's like to live without emotional awareness. You're still moving. You're still going through life. That's where I'm going to feel, but you're reacting instead of responding. You're guessing your way through conversations, triggered by things you don't fully understand, saying things you didn't mean to say. I'm going to feel. And afterward, you're left thinking, why did I do that? Or where did that come from? Awareness clears the fog. It puts you back in the driver's seat with your hands steady on the wheel. You still have emotions. They don't disappear, but now you can see them coming. You can slow down. I'm going to feel. Name them and work with them instead of letting them work against you. That's emotional freedom. It's not about not feeling anything. It's about not being controlled by what you feel. The tricky part is most people go through life on autopilot. We wake up, check our phones, scroll through some news, maybe get annoyed at traffic or a rude comment, and we just carry that with us. We let it build. But we rarely stop to ask, what am I feeling right now? Or even better, that's where I'm going to feel. What triggered that feeling? That kind of pause, that's where awareness starts. Just being able to name your emotion puts distance between you and it. Suddenly, that's where I'm going to feel. I am angry because notice I'm feeling anger right now. And that shift, that's powerful. That tiny bit of space is where your power lies. That's where there's also a misunderstanding that awareness means judgment, that if you're aware of your emotions, now you have to fix them or feel ashamed of them. It's not what this is about. Awareness is just observation. It's not about labeling emotions as good or bad. It's not about beating yourself up for feeling frustrated or anxious. It's about becoming a witness instead of a reactor. Think of it like a camera recording a scene. The camera doesn't judge what it sees. It just captures it. That's your role. Observe your inner world like a lens, not a critic. You're going to feel. And when you start practicing awareness consistently, you begin to notice patterns. You realize that every time you get a text that sounds a little short, your stomach tightens. I'm going to feel. Or that you feel drained after a certain type of conversation. Or that stress shows up as a short temper, not just as worry. Those connections are gold. Because once you recognize the pattern, you can break it. You can step in between stimulus and response and choose something different. But that choice only comes after awareness. Without it, you're stuck repeating the same cycle. Same reaction, same regret, over and over again. Awareness also gives you the language for healing. Feel. You can't ask for what you need in a relationship if you don't know what you're feeling. You can't communicate boundaries or apologize effectively. That's where I'm going to feel. Or show up with real presence if you're blind to what's happening inside. When you become aware of your emotional world, your outer world starts to make more sense too. That's where I'm going to feel. You stop blaming others for what's really unresolved within yourself. You stop needing everyone around you to act a certain way just so you can feel okay. And that's when you truly start to experience peace. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Most importantly, awareness is something you can build. It's a skill. Nobody's born perfectly emotionally aware. Some of us grew up in environments where feelings weren't talked about or were even punished. So that's where I'm going to feel. It's okay if this feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable. It doesn't mean you're broken. It just means this is new territory. And like any skill, the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. You begin to check in with yourself more often, ask better questions, and slow down your reactions. You start responding instead of exploding. That's where you notice what's happening in you instead of being consumed by it. That's the real work. Not pretending you don't feel things, but learning how to see them clearly, hold them gently, and choose your next step with intention to feel. Just because you think something doesn't make it true. That's a hard truth for a lot of us because we live inside our own heads all day long. We hear our thoughts constantly, and over time, we start to believe that every thought must be accurate, that it must be a fact. But it's not. Our minds are storytellers, not judges. They don't always speak the truth. They speak from memory, from fear, pain, from assumption. And unless you stop to question those thoughts, they'll run your life without you even realizing it. Think about how quickly a single thought can change your mood. You're having a decent day, then suddenly you remember something said a year ago, and now your chest is tight. Or you see a post online that makes you feel like you're behind in life. That's where I'm going to feel. And now you're overwhelmed. The facts didn't change. Nothing new actually happened, but your thoughts changed, and with them, your emotions followed. That's where how powerful they are. And that's why you have to start looking at your thoughts with a little more curiosity and a lot less obedience. We all have an inner voice. That's where I'm going to feel. And sometimes it's helpful. It warns us of danger, reminds us of what matters, keeps us from making the same mistake twice. But other times it gets distorted. It repeats criticism we heard from childhood. It echoes fears we've never unpacked. That's where I'm going to feel. It speaks in absolutes. I'll never get this, right? They don't really care about me. I always mess things up. And if you don't challenge those thoughts, that's where I'm going to feel. If you don't interrupt them and ask, that really true? Then your mind becomes a courtroom where only one side is allowed to speak. I'm going to feel. And that's not justice. That's a sentence. Questioning your thoughts doesn't mean ignoring them. It means slowing them down. It means stepping back and saying, okay, that's where I'm going to feel. I hear that thought, but where did it come from? What evidence do I have that it's true? What's another way to look at this? That pause, that moment of reflection, that's where I'm going to feel is where your clarity starts. Because a thought that goes unchallenged becomes a belief. And a belief that's built on a lie can shape your entire life in the wrong direction. That's where I'm going to feel. Let's say you think, I'm not good enough. That's a thought, not a fact. But if you hear it enough times in your own mind, it starts to shape how you show up. That's where you hesitate more. You stop trying new things. You shrink around people. You interpret neutral situations as rejection. And eventually, I'm going to feel your behavior confirms the thought, not because it was true to begin with, but because you let it lead. Now imagine what happens if you stop and ask, where did I first start thinking I wasn't enough? What if that voice isn't mine? That's where I'm going to feel. What if it's someone else's opinion I absorbed without realizing it? That kind of internal questioning is where healing begins. That's where I'm going to feel. That's how you stop living your life according to someone else's story. It's also important to realize that not every thought you have is even current. A lot of your internal dialogue was shaped years ago by a teacher who embarrassed you, by a parent who never said they were proud. That fueled by a moment when you felt small and didn't know how to process it. Your brain held on to those moments and built mental shortcuts. Stories it could repeat to keep you safe. That's where I'm going to feel, or small, or silent. But you're not that kid anymore. You're not that version of yourself. And those old thoughts, they're outdated software. It's time to debug them. I'm going to feel. One of the most powerful things you can do for your mental and emotional well-being is to treat your thoughts like suggestions, not commands. That's where I'm going to feel. Like a friend giving you advice, you can listen, but you don't have to agree. You can weigh the thought, ask where it's coming from. I'm going to feel, and then decide whether it deserves your attention. That kind of internal separation is what gives you freedom. You stop reacting automatically. That's where I'm going to feel. You stop spiraling based on one bad thought. And instead, you start leading your mind instead of following it. Your thoughts will always be there. That's not something to fear. But the more you practice this, the more you learn to pause, question, and reframe, the more you realize that your mind is a tool, not a truth teller. It's here to serve you. That's when I feel, not rule you. And that shift in perspective changes everything about how you live, how you feel, and how you show up in your own life. Emotions are powerful. They grab your attention, shift your focus, and often dictate the energy you bring into a moment. But here's what most people never learn growing up. Emotions are signals, not commands. They're messengers, not masters. Just because you feel something doesn't mean you have to act on it. Just because anger shows up doesn't mean you have to lash out. Just because fear knocks doesn't mean you have to hide. But for a lot of us, that's exactly how we've been living, like our emotions are steering the wheel and we're just passengers. Imagine your emotions as dashboard lights in a car. When that engine light comes on, it's not telling you to panic or pull the car over and abandon it. It's simply saying, hey, something needs your attention. That's how emotions work. They show up to alert you. Anger might be pointing to a boundary that was crossed. Sadness might be asking you to process something you've been avoiding. Anxiety might be preparing you for something unknown or reminding you that you care deeply. But none of those signals are commands. They're not demands. They're invitations to notice, to reflect, to respond with intention instead of reaction. The problem is we often confuse feeling something with being controlled by it. We feel stressed, so we snap. We feel rejected, so we shut down. We feel embarrassed, so we retreat. But in those moments, we're not really choosing, we're obeying. We're letting the emotion call the shots without stopping to interpret what it's really trying to say. That's like hearing a fire alarm and assuming your house is burning down when maybe someone just burned toast. Same sound, different cause. But if you don't check, you'll respond the same way every time, and often you'll overreact or misread the situation entirely. Learning to treat emotions as signals means developing a new relationship with them. It means sitting with discomfort long enough to ask, what is this really about? It means not labeling emotions as good or bad, but instead as data, information about your internal experience. Jealousy might be highlighting insecurity. Frustration might be tied to feeling unheard. Guilt might be pointing to a misalignment with your values. But you don't get to those insights if you act on emotion immediately. You get there by observing the emotion, listening to it, then deciding what the most helpful response is. There's also a cultural misunderstanding about emotional strength. A lot of people grow up thinking that emotional strength means suppressing what you feel, pushing it down, ignoring it, pretending it's not there. But real strength isn't suppression. Real strength is regulation. It's the ability to feel the full weight of an emotion and still stay grounded. It's being able to say, I'm angry right now, but I'm going to speak calmly, or I'm overwhelmed, but I'll take this one step at a time. That's emotional maturity. It's not that the emotion goes away, it's that it no longer owns you. Children act on impulse. When they're upset, they throw a tantrum. When they're disappointed, they shut down. They don't have the tools to create space between what they feel and what they do. But as adults, we're supposed to build that space. That's the work. That's the gap where growth happens between stimulus and response. And the more you practice noticing emotions as signals, the wider that gap becomes. You start to create a pause, a breath, a beat, where you check in with yourself. And in that pause, you can choose differently. Emotions will always be part of your life. You can't turn them off, and you shouldn't want to. They're there to guide you, to alert you, to connect you with your values. But they're not the whole story. They're one piece of the puzzle. If you make every decision based only on what you feel in the moment, you'll find yourself chasing emotional relief instead of long-term growth. But when you learn to decode the signal, when you learn to say, I feel this, but I don't have to act on it right now, that's where emotional freedom begins. That's where you go from being reactive to being responsive, from being led by emotion to being led by wisdom that includes emotion, but isn't ruled by it. There's a split second between what happens to you and what you do next. It's small, barely noticeable at first, but it's there. That tiny space is where your real power lives. It's the difference between reacting out of emotion and responding with intention. And most people move through life so quickly, so automatically, they miss it. Something triggers them and boom, the reaction follows. Words fly, decisions are made, damage is done. But when you learn to pause before you react, everything starts to shift. That pause creates room for clarity, for choice, and for control over your next move. It's easy to get swept up in the heat of the moment. Someone says something that pushes a button. An unexpected problem shows up. You get embarrassed, insulted, hurt. And in that flash of discomfort, your brain wants to protect you. It goes into defense mode, fight, flight, freeze. The instinct is fast. It doesn't ask questions. It just pulls the trigger. But emotional intelligence is not about speed. It's about self-awareness. And self-awareness grows in that pause, in the space between the stimulus and your response. Pausing doesn't mean you're avoiding the situation. It means you're respecting it enough to approach it wisely. It's about slowing the moment down so you can actually see what's happening underneath. Why did that comment sting so badly? Why are your shoulders suddenly tense? Why is your voice rising? That pause is where you catch the emotion before it runs the show. You catch the assumption before it turns into accusation. You catch the story your brain is telling you before it becomes a belief. And once you see it, you can decide what you want to do with it. Think about how many moments in life could have gone differently if you had just paused for 5 seconds. A text you wish you hadn't sent, a response in a meeting that came out sharper than you meant, a conversation with someone you love that escalated because neither of you stopped to breathe. Those 5 seconds are small, but they carry weight. They carry the ability to redirect, not just the moment, but sometimes the entire relationship. The pause doesn't erase the emotion. It just gives you space to move through it instead of getting swallowed by it. The truth is, most of what you regret later doesn't come from what you felt. It comes from what you did when you didn't give yourself time to process what you felt. That's why the pause is so powerful. It creates a buffer between the intensity of the emotion and the action that follows. And in that buffer, you get to access tools that your reactive brain usually doesn't reach for: empathy, logic, restraint, grace. The part of you that wants to protect connection instead of burn bridges. The part of you that wants peace more than being right. That part only shows up when you give it room to breathe. This doesn't mean you're pretending not to feel. In fact, the pause is what allows you to feel fully without being hijacked by the emotion. You feel the anger, but you also see the reason behind it. You feel the fear, but you also notice that not all fear is danger. You feel the frustration, but you realize it might not be about this exact moment. When you pause, you give your nervous system time to catch up, your mind time to sort through what's real, and your heart time to choose what matters most. The more you practice pausing, the more natural it becomes. At first, it feels forced. You have to remind yourself in real time. You might only notice the need for a pause after the reaction already happened. But that's still growth. That's still awareness developing. Over time, you start to feel it sooner. You recognize the signs, the quickening heartbeat, the short fuse, the tightening jaw. You catch it just early enough to take a breath, unclench your hands, soften your tone. And that breath becomes a turning point. Not just in how you feel, but in how you lead yourself and others through difficult moments. Pausing gives you the upper hand, not over other people, but over your impulses. It's not about manipulation or performance. It's about alignment, choosing your next move from a place that honors who you are and who you're trying to become. Anyone can react. That doesn't take skill. That's easy. But responding with wisdom, with calm, with strength, that takes discipline. That takes presence. And that presence is only possible when you learn to slow down enough to see the moment clearly before you move through it. Your mind is constantly talking to you. It narrates your day, judges your actions, compares your progress, reminds you of the past, and worries about the future. That's where I'm going to feel. That voice inside isn't random. It's shaped by what you feed it, what you read, watch, who you listen to, who you follow, the conversations you engage in. That's where I'm going to feel. Even the jokes you hear, all of it becomes mental fuel. And over time, those inputs shape your internal dialogue. So if you want to change the way you speak to yourself, that's where I'm going to feel. You have to start by looking at what's influencing that voice in the first place. We tend to underestimate how much our environment affects our mindset. It's not always obvious. It's not like one podcast episode or one social media post rewrites your entire belief system, but it builds up. Repetition has power. A negative narrative, when heard enough times, starts to sound familiar, and familiarity feels like truth. So when you constantly consume content that reinforces fear, comparison, scarcity, or judgment, that's where I'm going to feel. Your mind absorbs those messages and starts to echo them back to you. Not because they're true, but because they're what you've trained your mind to rehearse. I'm going to feel the people you spend time with are part of that input too. If your conversations are filled with criticism, gossip, or complaining, you carry that tone into your own internal thoughts. You start judging yourself the way others judge the world around them. You start seeing problems before possibilities. On the flip side, if you're around people who speak with purpose, that's where I'm going to feel, who focus on growth, who give grace instead of blame, your mind begins to mirror that energy. It starts offering you more supportive thoughts, more compassionate reflections, more space for progress instead of perfection. Your phone plays a bigger role than most of us want to admit. Every scroll is a seed. You're not just killing time, you're planting ideas. And even when you think you're just watching entertainment, your subconscious is absorbing language, emotion, tone, values. If your feed is full of drama, unrealistic lifestyles, constant outrage, or performative success, your mind starts to normalize those messages. And then, without realizing it, you start measuring your life against a filtered version of reality. Your thoughts start asking, why am I going to feel? Why am I not there yet? Or, what's wrong with me? Or, why does everyone else have it figured out? Not because those questions are true, but because that's what your input has rehearsed. The brain is always listening. It listens to what you say out loud and to what you hear around you. That's where I'm going to feel. So if you're trying to be more confident, but your inputs are rooted in insecurity, it's going to be an uphill battle. If you're trying to be more grounded, that's where I'm going to feel. But you're feeding your mind chaos every day. The noise inside will never quiet. Changing your internal dialogue starts with curating what you allow in. That's where I'm going to feel. That means being intentional about your content diet. It means asking yourself, does this serve the person I'm becoming? Every time you consume something, that's where I'm going to feel. It doesn't mean cutting everything out completely, but it does mean becoming more aware of the influence each input has on your emotional tone. I'm going to feel. Your internal dialogue isn't just about you believe. It's about what you've rehearsed. You can practice confidence the same way you've practiced doubt. That's where I'm going to feel. You can train calm the same way you've trained anxiety, but that training starts with what you're feeding your mind. When you listen to things that uplift you, that's where I'm going to read things that challenge you and talk to people who reflect the best in you. Your thoughts begin to shift. You start hearing a different kind of voice inside, one that gives you space to grow, one that encourages effort instead of demanding perfection. I'm going to feel one that responds to makes with curiosity instead of criticism. None of this happens by accident. If you don't take control of your input, someone else will. Algorithms, I'm going to feel advertisers, toxic people, they all have messages they want you to absorb. And if you're not actively choosing your input, you're passively accepting theirs. That's where I'm going to feel. That's why intentionality matters. Not in a paranoid way, but in a protective way. You're not building walls. You're setting boundaries. You're not rejecting the world. You're filtering it through a lens that supports your values, your goals, your mental health. When you shift your input, your mind recalibrates. I'm going to feel. The thoughts you hear in the quiet moments start to sound less like fear and more like focus. Less like shame and more like self-awareness. Less like pressure and more like purpose. And it doesn't require a complete life overhaul. Small, consistent choices over time change the tone of your entire inner world. I'm going to feel. You start noticing how much more stable you feel when you're not constantly feeding your mind noise. How much clearer your thinking becomes when you're intentional about what you consume. How much more peaceful your inner world gets when the inputs are aligned with the life you want to build. One of the most liberating truths you can learn is this: you are not your mind. You are the one observing it, the voice in your head. That running commentary, the constant thoughts, the worry, the overanalysis, that's not you. That's just activity. It's your brain doing what it's designed to do, which is think. And it's really good at it. It pulls from memory, it imagines futures, it replays conversations, it builds worst case scenarios, and sometimes it encourages you. Other times it criticizes you. But through all of it, there's something underneath, something deeper that notices what's happening. That quiet awareness, that's you. The problem is, most people never learn how to separate who they are from what they think. So when the mind starts spiraling, when the thoughts are anxious, angry, or full of shame, they assume that's just who they are. I'm a mess. I'm broken. I can't get it together. But that's not identity. It's identification. It's confusing the content of the mind with the core of the self. And once you start believing that every thought you have is a reflection of your worth or your reality, you get stuck in a cycle. You stop questioning your thoughts. You stop observing them. You start obeying them. But here's what's true. Your thoughts are like clouds. Some are light and harmless. Others are heavy and dark. But none of them are permanent. They come and go. They shift and pass. And just like the sky isn't the clouds, you are not the thoughts that pass through your awareness. You are the sky. You're the space that holds it all. That awareness is where your strength comes from. It gives you the ability to notice a thought without becoming it. To say, this is what I'm thinking, instead of this is who I am. There's something incredibly grounding about realizing you can step back from your thoughts and just watch them, not argue with them, not fix them. Just observe. That alone creates distance. And in that distance, there's freedom. You begin to understand that the mind is a tool, not a master. It's helpful, but not always accurate. It reacts to old patterns. It brings up fears based on past wounds. It replays things that no longer apply. And when you're lost inside of it, you believe it all. But when you observe it from the outside, you gain perspective. This is the difference between thinking and awareness. Thinking is automatic. It's the default mode. Awareness is intentional. It's the ability to say, wow, that's a really anxious thought I just had, instead of getting swept into the anxiety itself. You might still feel it, but now you're watching it instead of being controlled by it. That shift doesn't make you numb. It makes you present. Because now you can respond instead of react. You can ground yourself in the moment instead of living in a mental movie created by fear, regret, or insecurity. This kind of observation takes practice. At first, it's hard to catch. You realize only after the thought has pulled you in, after you've been stressed for hours, after you've overreacted. But slowly, you start noticing sooner. You start hearing the mind's patterns, the way it catastrophizes, the way it criticizes, the way it repeats old stories. And with time, you stop believing everything it says. You begin to say, there goes my mind again, with a little more humor and a little less fear. You don't need to shut it off. You just need to know you're not it. When you know you're the observer, you also stop taking your emotions as absolute truth. You can say, I feel overwhelmed, without it turning into, I can't handle this. You can feel angry without turning it into aggression. You can feel sadness without labeling yourself as broken. Because the observer knows that emotions, like thoughts, are temporary experiences. They pass through. they give you information and then they move on, but only if you don't attach to them, only if you watch them without fusing your entire identity to them. The more you build that space between you and your mind, the more empowered you become. You stop being a puppet of your thoughts and start becoming the narrator of your own story. You choose what you want to listen to. You question what feels true. You hold compassion for the parts of your mind that are scared or tired or holding old pain. But you don't let them drive the bus. You stay in the seat of the observer, the calm, steady awareness that watches it all and chooses what to do next with clarity and intention.